sometimes it comes before. So it's not always clear how this is, what's driving what. So here's a regional breakdown of where most of our Christian universities are coming from. See significant growth here. Right? And then from there you'll also see, this is something I pulled down, this is actually a very similar trend to that which was written about by a guy named Philip Jenkins, and he wrote a book called The Next Christianity, or The Next Christendom. I think I got that mixed up a little bit. But at any rate, it's called The Next Christendom, The Coming of Global Christianity. And here he said, and this book came out about 10 years ago or so, 12 years ago. He said that Christianity's face is shifting from being white and European or American to being brown and African and Asian. Right? And we found the same thing then, as you saw, with Christian colleges and universities. A great percentage of them that have been founded in the South and in the East. So my third thesis, I'm going to make sure I'm on target here, is that Christian higher education's growth, it occurs most when it's outside or apart from state power. So what we're saying, you remember I talked about the state, the rule of law, and civil society. It turns out, it seems to be, I should say, I don't want to argue this too forcefully, but it seems to me that when states come close to Christian colleges, it's always the Christian college that suffers. And historically, this has been the case. Certainly in the United States, there have been many scholarly articles and books written. One of the best, perhaps, is called The Soul of the American University. And that's written by a guy named George Marsden. And George Marsden writes, it's a really fat book. It's a good read if you're interested in this kind of topic. It'll put you to sleep if you're not. It might put you to sleep if you are. But anyway, he says that since American colleges were founded, every single college up until about 1900 was founded clearly within Christian guidelines. So even the University of Michigan, right, was founded, when it was founded, it hired explicitly Christian professors. It hired pastors to teach courses. And it did that on a purpose, not by accident. It sought out pastors. But in a fairly short time, historically, 50 years, nearly every one of those secularized. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, University of Chicago, Berkeley, on and on and on. All of these secularized, so it became almost impossible to hire Christians in there. Not just a change to neutrality. Right. So we found some evidence of this in terms of historical discussions, but then we started looking at how might we see this in the data that we collected, and this is what we found. We looked at the different denominations, Christian denominations, and what we found, I think, was quite interesting. Seventh-day Adventists. You want to find a denomination that's founding universities worldwide? You go to SDAs. They're the ones who are starting Christian colleges. Next, evangelicals. Both of those groups, unlike many of the other ones, are far from political power. They're usually outcasts and marginalized in society. Okay? That's certainly the case in many, many places. SDAs for sure. It's very, Seventh-day Adventists usually reach out and thrive in communities of marginalized persons. And they're the ones starting them. And that also jives with something that connected with me personally, which is when myself and Joel Carpenter and Perry were hearing stories, we were hearing stories of new universities in places that had very little in terms of economic resources. Perhaps one of the most famous ones is the establishment of the Christian Theological University of East Africa, and that's in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a place populated primarily by the Lord's Resistance Army, a terror outfit that has been involved with upwards of 2 or 3 million deaths in Uganda, Congo, Tanzania, Rwanda. Right? No money, terrible place to start, very dangerous, and they're thriving. Or another one in that same part of the world, the Uganda Christian University, UCU. It is founded almost the same year as Handong, and it has about 11,000 students. They talk from an explicitly Christian worldview kind of perspective. They're required of all their faculty members. There is explicitly and unapologetically Christian. Again, in some ways, you look at these folks and you say, you have no business starting a Christian college. You have no money, you have no facility. And they say, by God's power, He will provide. And He has. The numbers just tell you this over and over and over. It's not money that founds universities in some ways. So, again, I'm not trying to make too much of a claim for these. It seems like this is the connection that we're seeing. It matches some of the data, matches some of what we're hearing. Okay? My fourth thesis, then, is that I think Christian higher education can provide a distinct path to development. Now, remember, we talked about those 3 parts, right? We talked about the state, rule of law, and civil society. Right? That's what this guy talks about. This is a great big book he came out with a couple years ago, Frank Fukuyama. He's the one who wrote about the last man of history, right? The end of history. Well, it turns out, if you open up this book, Institutes of Christian Religion by John Calvin, you find the same 3 categories. I just needed to throw that in there in case you thought I was a trendy academic. No, I'm trying not to be too much of a trendy academic. These same 3 categories are in John Calvin's arguments. And what... I need to back up a second. Can't see that. Oh, we can't see that either. There we go. We'll leave that there for a second. What I want to look at in terms of is to start connecting this with my development interests. And what I've been doing is teaching and thinking about Christian higher education and development. And, the state is the one that provides the context. The state provides big projects, water, dams. It provides roads, electricity. That's what the state provides. It provides structure, administrative. It provides enforcement of the laws, police officers. It provides outside protection. The rule of law provides the way in which those things ought to be administered. It suggests things like the law ought not be a respecter of persons. It requires that certain penalties be meted out. Right? And then civil society. Well, there are different views of civil society, and I don't particularly care for Francis Fukuyama's definition. The point is that there are other institutions that are not political and that can't be reduced to individuals. Those are what institutions of civil society are. So what would they be? Can you give me an example? What's an institution of civil society? All right, everybody, look around. You'll see one. Are your eyes open? Don't look at me. You can look at the floor, you can look at the ceiling, you can look at the desk, and you got it. The university is an institute of civil society, right? Right? Schools, churches, right? These are things of civil society. Now, what Fukuyama would say, and what many Hegelians say, is civil society is what they call a mediating institution. That's not really what it is. They don't... Institutions of civil society, their primary job, they say, is to mediate between the state and individuals. But nobody goes to church, that I know of anyway, to say, I hope that my participation in civil society is mediated by this institution so that the political leaders will better understand my beliefs. I mean, who does that? You go to church to worship. That has the effect of providing a context that's not political, in which you can associate, but that's not the purpose. The purpose isn't to mediate politics. The purpose is to worship. The purpose when you go to the hospital, you think to yourself, here's a great place in which my interests can be mediated to the state. Who does that? You go to the hospital to get fixed, to get cured, to get healed, right? So that's what I think civil society is in that sense. We ought to think of civil society as something in which we participate for its own purposes. That's a closer connection actually to a tradition that I'm more familiar with that talks about civil society. It's a tradition that centers around a guy named Abraham Kuyper. That's another lecture, though. Not that I wouldn't want to give it, but I mean, that's a different lecture. Now, within that area of civil society, we locate, obviously, Christian higher education. Now, I want to locate now, the next thing I want to do for you is recognize that there are different kinds of universities. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to draw 3 of them. Okay? On the one hand, and I'm going to go on the other hand, right? You know how this works. So on one hand, there are large public universities. Right? In Korea, we call it Korea University, or Seoul National. We call those big public universities. They're really good at promoting and trying to connect the interests of Korea as a nation with the research projects that they promote. Sometimes also culture building, language, poetry, performing arts, to help solidify a sense of the nation. Now, that's not a bad thing. John Calvin would point out, for example, that states help draw us out of our own sense of love of self. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Okay? But they're big and they're primarily national. Big stuff, right? On the other hand, are private institutions. Now, in many places in Africa, you can see these very easily. They're on posts and they say things like, hey, here, learn how to work Windows, or PowerPoint, or other quick sort of IT things. How can you quickly learn a job-related skill so that you can quickly get a job? Okay? Often technical, often very closely job-related. And that's what we talk about, a much more private kind of institution. It's not aimed to help the public good directly. Maybe indirectly, through the promotion of certain business skills that provide jobs and other public goods. But that's an indirect effect. The primary appeal of these curricula is individual prosperity. They're very much a private institution. So that's one side, and there's the other. Now, if we've done on one hand and on the other hand, where do Christian higher educational institutions fit? Right in the middle. They, it turns out, have lots of the same kinds of things that you would expect of universities. They do public goods, public-minded trainings, but they also have some of the things that are seen as private. The common thing, though, is that they're understood almost always to be all within Christ's lordship, Christ's direction. His sovereignty directs all of the arts and sciences. So this is what I've started finding, this kind of interesting pattern. So yes, business and management and commerce. These are, by the way, these are very easy courses. They're not expensive to run. Right? Because many Christian universities are always working with a very tight budget. They're always working with not much money, and they're trying to give as many Christian students the opportunity to study as possible. But in addition, look, so in addition to business and IT, we get theology, social sciences, education, health sciences and nursing, agriculture. We get a whole bunch of other disciplines that are not private-oriented. They're a different kind of public-oriented program. So Christian higher education then provides something, at least structurally, that comes in between these two things. Now, I think this needs further comparative research, but the statistics indicate the broader interests of the third wave of Christian higher education. Now, to close, I want to give you a little story about how this Christian higher education played out at a small institution called Bishop Apasami College of Arts and Sciences. It was founded in 1995, so it's clearly part of the third wave. They have 10 undergraduate departments, 7 MAs, 1 PhD program, and an independent college of education. Now, My friend Emmanuel Jonigan, I met him at a conference when I was running EOPSHE. He came to me and told me about this incredible thing that they were involved in at Bishop Apasami. And at Apasami, he was a professor of social work, one of those helping disciplines we talked about. And he noticed that outside the jail, towards the end of every month, there would be a whole bunch of little kids hanging out outside the jail windows. 3 days, 4 days, and the first of the month they'd be gone. Month after month, he noticed this. What's going on? So he started to investigate, and it turns out that these were all children of women who were imprisoned for prostitution. Well, why are women with children involved in prostitution? It turns out that almost every single one of them had been thrown out of the house by a husband who was trading up, to put it not so delicately, for a younger model. He's trading out, getting rid of the wife and her children. And the women were allowed some amounts of social services and food, but that would almost always run out by the end of the month. So what they were left with is prostitution. And the children then were waiting outside until their mothers threw them some food from their cell, which they would catch and eat that night. So my friend Emmanuel, he said, we got to figure this out. This seems not right. So he recruited people, students, to start thinking about social work in that kind of context. He changed his course. And of course, the way it was taught, it became real. It became, in a sense, really connected to the problems of the world. He reached out to people in criminal justice involved with that, who worked with the prisoners, with the prison structures, with the man who, especially the man who ran the prison, to figure out why these people would show up primarily at the end of the month. And it turns out that had to do in large part because officers are required to fill a quota. That means a certain amount of arrests every month. So you had to have so many street kids that were stealing. So pickpockets, you could check off how many pickpockets you'd arrested. Then you'd have to make sure you knew how many prostitutes. And the easiest way is to round up these ladies at the end of the month, and there you go. You've made your quota. Very easy to do. Okay? So he got involved with the criminal justice folks. And then So then the criminal justice folks would start talking to the police officers and say, you really need to find a different population. We're going to be working with these ladies to keep them off the streets. You go look for a different set of prostitutes to find. But leave these ones alone. Then he worked with people in clothing design. Bishop Apasami has a very large clothing design program. So hundreds of students learn how to sew in intricate patterns and things because they have a large textile industry. But it turns out they have hundreds of old model machines that they got to get rid of. Well, the university said, well, how about this? Have the students teach these women how to sew on the old machines, and if they're proficient, they can have the machine. So then they got involved. Students learn most. Do you know this? This is why professors often require you to do presentations. You learn more when you're doing than when you're sitting here listening. So if you want to learn this stuff, you should come up, But you learn in doing, and that's what these students did. They started teaching other people how to sew, and their ability to sew went up. They got better at it. So the school was a better teacher when it was teaching other women how to sew. Well, we needed one other group, and that was the business management people got involved to help the women understand how much of the revenue that they get from doing piecework they needed to keep and hold to be able to plan